This is the first in a series of 5 seminars through March. And if you want to find out more about the other seminars and register, and you're obviously very welcome to do so, and just check out our website at www.kielseapowerseries.com or follow us on Twitter at @SeaPowerSeries. The hashtag for this series of events, if you want to make your voice heard over Twitter, is hashtag America's Navies. For those of you who don't know me, I am Dr. Sebastian Bruns. I am the head of the Center for Maritime Strategy and Security at the Institute for Security Policy, University of Kiel. That's a very long name, I realize that. We are located in northern Germany, in the traditional historic maritime town of Kiel, northern Germany. The Institute for Security Policy at the University of Kiel is fortunate to have continental Europe's only think tank dedicated to maritime security and naval strategy, which happens to be the one you are listening to right now. We do what academics do. We provide original research and expertise to policymakers, the media, to militaries, and to the industry, the maritime industry, the naval industry in Europe and North America, mostly with a focus, obviously, on Germany and NATO allies. We do so through publications, through seminars, and all kinds of media engagements, and through also high-level conferences such as the Kiel International Sea Power Symposium and the Baltic Sea Strategy Forum, which we co-host with partners in Scandinavia. And of course, the times are rough for all of us, given the global pandemic. I'm all the more pleased that we can have this conversation here, and that we stirred up enough interest, more than enough interest, I should say, from people all around the world in this first session. So welcome once again from my side. I should add that ISPK is a not-for-profit, a non-profit institution, for those who don't know it. And so if there's an opportunity to work with us that you see, feel free to reach out to me after this event, and we can discuss ideas. The same goes if you're looking for a place for your ideas and also for your tax-deductible donations. That also is an opportunity here. Without further ado, to our two speakers. The first speaker is Professor Sal Mercogliano. He's an associate professor of history at Campbell University in North Carolina in the United States. And his fields of interest include military and maritime history, the maritime industry policy, and world history. And we're very fortunate to have him, along with James Howe, who I'll introduce in a minute, because Sal has been, I met Sal 2 years ago in Annapolis at the US Naval Academy, and he's been the ultimate voice on the maritime industry, on American sea lift, and on commercial shipping that I follow and that I adhere to. And also he's a graduate of the University of Alabama, a state to which I also have some relations. So I'll just say roll tide, Sal.
Roll tide.
And I apologize to any Auburn fans on the call.
I don't.
I knew you wouldn't. And our second speaker, I've not met him personally, but I've read his book. It's called, his major book is called Red Crew: Fighting the War on Drugs with Reagan's Coast Guard. And that tells you that Captain James Howe of the United States Coast Guard, captain for 27 years, has been not just he hasn't just held command of Coast Guard cutters, but also he's been a prolific writer and an analyst of US Coast Guard issues. And he's got a background in government studies, in strategic studies, and in space studies, which I found to be a very interesting and very promising combination of all of them. And once again, I'm very pleased to have not just all of you on this call, but these two fine experts who will share their views on two of America's navies, not traditional navies in the common sense, but kicking us off in just the right way. What we'll do is we'll have the two presentations back to back, and then followed by moderated Q&A. So can I please ask you, if you have a question, if you have a comment, please use the chat function. Just make yourself known, that so we can have a list, and then we will call on you, and you can unmute yourself and ask the question. That also means that please mute your microphones for the time of the presentation, so we won't have any purring cats or barking dogs or the likes in this call, and we can go ahead. Having said all of this, Sal, the floor is yours.
Well, Sebastian, I want to thank you, first of all, and the Center for Maritime Strategy and Security for the invite to talk about this topic. This is a topic I'm very passionate about, having been a former merchant mariner, having sailed in this field. And I feel like one of the things that makes U.S. military such a unique military on the planet is their ability consistently throughout its history, going back to as far as 1898, to not just deploy, but to logistically support itself in these overseas endeavors. And having said that, I was really taken aback very recently, just this December. The Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Mike Gilday, gave a statement. He was at a panel alongside the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and he said this: "We war game and we study logistics all the time, but we never have developed really a plan for sustaining the fleet in a fight. And so that's an important project for us in 2021, to actually develop a plan for how we sustain a fleet, not just logistics. We haven't been forced. We haven't forced ourselves to take a deep look in terms of a plan, and we need one." That is an amazing comment from the Chief of Naval Operations, since the utility of the American military has been its ability not just to sail and surge forces across the oceans, but to sustain them in those long fights. What I'd like to do in the time I have available here in the beginning is just give you an overview of how American Merchant Marine and Sealift supports U.S. national defense strategy. And I like to always refer to this as the Sealift pyramid. It's a four-sided object that really supports America's national defense strategy. There's fleet support. These are the vessels that directly support the U.S. Navy. There's prepositioning, which is the ships that are forward deployed, preloaded, out there operating right now, ready to deploy at a very short notice. There's surge sealift. These are vessels that are government-owned, operated by the Ready Reserve Force of the Maritime Administration and the Navy's Military Sealift Command, that can be activated in short notice, loaded, and then sent across. And then there's the sustainment element, which is the American Merchant Marine, that provides that needed sustainment to do this. These elements are a cross-section. There's a mix of government-owned ships, commercially owned ships. They employ commercial merchant mariners. They employ government-owned merchant mariners. And so the U.S. solution to their sealift issue is a very complex one. To perform the four missions, they draw upon four different fleets. Let's see if I can advance my slide. There we go. They draw upon four different fleets. The coordinating agency for all this is the United States Transportation Command, created in 1988, one of the unified commands. Transportation Command handles both land, air, and sea logistics for the United States. And as such, Military Sealift Command reports to the U.S. Transportation Command. They have a very divided command structure, Military Sealift Command. They actually report to three different agencies. One of them is Transportation Command. This fleet, the Military Sealift Command fleet, has its own vessels that it operates, many government-owned vessels with contract and civilian mariners on board. Military Sealift Command has been in existence since, in one version or another, since 1949. It draws upon the Ready Reserve Force for ships for the surge sealift. The Ready Reserve Force came out of the Vietnam War, when there was an appreciation for a need that the ships in the reserve fleet weren't as well maintained as they should be, but also the fact that the U.S. commercial merchant marine wasn't always ready on instantaneous notice to load cargo and send it across. And plus, it wasn't always economical and always available to do that. Then there's the Maritime Security Program. This is a subset of the U.S. ocean-going merchant fleet. 60 vessels. It was initially 47 vessels, but 60 vessels that receive basically a subsidy, $5 million per ship, 60 ships in the program, a $300 million per year program that is involved in international trade. What the United States gets from the Maritime Security Program is not just 60 vessels and all its cargo capability, but also the networks of the international companies they represent, Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, firms like APL, which is a subset of CMA. So they get a lot from the Maritime Security Program. And then finally, there's the U.S. ocean-going merchant marine. And these are the blue water merchant marine. And they really contain kind of three elements in there. There's the ships in the Maritime Security Force. There's ships of the Jones Act, which are protected trade within the cabotage of the United States. And then there's ships that are under charter to the United States, U.S. military. So what I want to do is just very briefly just talk about each of those four programs, talk about where they stand today and some issues that are on the horizon for them and issues going forward. And again, happy to answer any questions of this in the Q&A. So the first is the fleet support. These are the vessels that provide the direct fleet aid to the ships out there. Not commonly realized is the fact that 1/5 of the entire U.S. Navy is crewed by civilian merchant mariners. Right now, the Navy has 29 vessels that provide fleet support. The idea of civilians providing direct fleet support is not a new thing in the history of the United States. In 1899, Secretary of the Navy Long authorized the collier Alexander to be outfitted with a civilian crew. And prior to World War I, civilian manning of auxiliary ships was a fair, normal thing. Ended during World War I. It was resurrected at the end of the Vietnam War. And in 1972, the USS Teluga became USNS Teluga, U.S. naval ship Teluga, with a civilian crew. And over time, that has increased to the point today where 1 out of 5 ships in the U.S. Navy have these civilians on board. And particularly since 2010, all auxiliaries in the U.S. Navy are civilian manned or have a civilian crew on board, including some vessels that would be considered frontline units. I would argue that the ships in the auxiliary fleet, the Combat Logistics Force, are some of the most advanced out there right now. The Lewis and Clark class that came out at the beginning of the 21st century replaced older classes of stores and ammunition ships. Just the other last week, the John Lewis, a new oiler for the U.S. Navy, was launched. They're going to eventually replace ships of the Kaiser class, which were built in the 80s and the 90s. And the U.S. possesses a very advanced underway support force, but that's not to say it doesn't have issues. One of the most important is how the United States has fought wars since the Second World War. If you look at Korea, if you look at Vietnam, if you look at the Persian Gulf, the logistics for those wars were fought over short distances. In Korea, you drew your supplies out of Japan. In Vietnam, from Subic Bay in the Philippines. In the Persian Gulf War, right there from the Persian Gulf, Fujairah and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. The U.S. has not had its logistics lines challenged. And this slide that I have here really highlights that. So one of the areas that needs attention is the fact that, for example, the merchant ships feeding into those forward bases don't exist like they did in the past. The U.S. uses a lot of commercial ships, but not U.S. ships, to sustain those forward bases. And the ability to sustain those forward bases in a peer-to-peer conflict or a contested environment could be a challenge. Back in the day when MSTS, the forerunner for MSC, was created, it had a large fleet of oilers and cargo ships that were used for that. Today, not as many. And one of the big issues that's been identified recently is the need for more tankers in the American Merchant Marine to support this. The other element, which has gone on since really 1990 and going forward, is the shift of MSC oilers and supply ships from their role as shuttle ships, going from base to provide stores and ammunition and fuel, to ships supporting the battle fleet, to the merging of the shuttle ships and station ships. So what this means now is there's not those ships that have to basically run back to the bases and bring fuel and food and ammunition to the ships on station. Now it's the same ship. That works fine when your supply bases are very close by. But if you have to go trans-Pacific, transatlantic, trans-Indian Ocean, that's going to create problems. There's not enough shipping to do that. And that's a big issue that's really looming on the horizon. So even though the U.S. has a very advanced underway replenishment fleet, there are issues associated with it. The second one has to deal with the prepositioning fleet. Prepositioning has been a validated concept since the Persian Gulf War of 1990. Some of the first heavy troops on the ground were Marine brigades from the prepositioning squadron at Diego Garcia. The issue with pre-positioning has evolved. Number one, they're fairly expensive. You're paying for ships to sit out at anchor and do not a lot. And what we've seen is really the transition of the pre-positioning fleet, where there's once 3 squadrons stationed around the world. They're now down to 2 squadrons based at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean and in the Western Pacific on the Marianas. Each of these squadrons also don't carry the full complement for a Marine brigade as they should. They're down to about 2/3 the level they need to carry. They also have issues regarding their age. Several of the pre-positioning ships, at least 3 in each of the 2 squadrons, are referred to as legacy MPS. That's a very nice way to say old. I like to refer to myself as a legacy maritime historian because they're over 25 years old. They're going to need replacement down the road. And unfortunately, this has not been a priority. If you look at Commandant Berger's guidance, which everyone looks to for really a forward-thinking Marine Corps, he only lists 1 paragraph in the entire document towards this. And it says this: for several decades, the MPF, the Maritime Prepositioning Force, represented a competitive advantage for the Marine Corps. That is less the case today. During a major contingency, our MPF ships would be highly vulnerable and difficult to protect. We must be prepared to fundamentally alter this capability as well as all the inventory currently programmed for inclusion within the MPF as we rethink the future of this capability. The third element is the surge sea lift. In March of 2019, the outgoing administrator for the Maritime Administration, Admiral Busby, and the chief commander of the U.S. Transportation Command, General Lyons, gave a very hard-hitting testimony before Congress, where they laid out the critical problems regarding the surge sea lift fleet. 61 ships, their average age is 46 years old. 46 years old. And in September of 2019, before we got hit by COVID, there was a huge activation of these vessels in what was referred to as Turbo Activation 19. 49 of the 61 vessels were activated. The plan is that these ships, which provide over 10 million square feet of cargo capacity, would have an 85% reliability rate. In other words, you can call upon 85% of this fleet at any time, and they're ready to go. Based on the activations that were done and other tests that were done, the United States Transportation Command issued an after-action report where they identified this fleet at 40% availability, far below of what is required for a surge sea lift scenario, meaning that combatant commanders do not have the number of ships and cargo space available that they are planning on. And then finally, there's the sustainment portion, and this is drawn from the U.S. commercial fleet. I can talk a lot about this topic, obviously, but I'm just going to give you a very brief overview. Suffice it to say, the maritime industry has changed fundamentally since 1945. The idea of state-controlled merchant marines have declined. Now it's open registries, flags of conveniences, largest merchant marines on the planet: Panama, Liberia, Marshall Islands, Hong Kong. They make up over 50% of world shipping today. The U.S. merchant marine is number 21 in the world. But what's important to understand about the U.S. merchant marine is, number one, it has declined, obviously. Number two, world cargo has increased exponentially. Since 1950, the amount of cargo we carry by sea has increased 22 times over what it was. Our ability to move cargo is much better, much faster than we've ever seen. The problem is the U.S. merchant marine has declined, and I'm working on an article right now for CIMSEC where one of the things I talk about is issues facing the U.S. Navy today in shipbuilding has a lot to do with the fact that not a lot of ships are being built in the United States, period. These are examples of ships recently built in the United States: tanker at NASSCO, a container ro-ro for Pasha Lines, a ro-ro for Tote, a container ship for Matson in Philadelphia. These are great designs. These are great, fabulous vessels that have capabilities. The problem is too few of them are being built. When you build a few ships, it's like building a work of art. It's not building ships. And so one of the things that happens is you don't have a lot of shipping to draw upon when the sustainment happens. The sustainment fleet, this U.S. merchant fleet, provides the mariners for that surge sea lift. It provides the sustainment needed to make sure that the fleets and armies that are deployed overseas have a secure chain of communications. And one of the things I would argue about, and again, I'm happy to talk about this during the Q&A as I wrap up here, is what can be done? What can be done? The lack of a commercial infrastructure in the United States has fundamentally not just hurt the merchant marine, but it's hurt the Navy. In the 1950s, after the end of World War II, when the U.S. had built the largest fleet the world had ever seen commercially, there was a fear that we were going to lose our shipbuilding capability. And the U.S. initiated what was referred to as the Mariner program. They built 35 C-4 freighters spread across 7 shipyards. And those ships became the basis, not just for commercial vessels, but also for many military vessels and auxiliaries. Recently, in the about less than 10 years ago, the U.S. Navy took in hand a Maersk roll-on, roll-off ship and converted it from the MV Craigside into the MV Ocean Trader, a ship that's basically operating as a vessel for the U.S. Special Operations Command. It houses helicopters, it has amphibious landing capabilities, it has crew capabilities. I refer to in an article I wrote for CMSSEC as the ultimate stealth ship because it can merge in. The U.S. Navy has taken in hand Alaska-class tankers, went to NASSCO, who built these vessels, and had them build new vessels to these expeditionary support bases. And so the lack of a commercial infrastructure has really hurt the U.S. military. And I think it's one of the issues that needs to be looked at as they go forward. I appreciate your time, and I turn it back over to Sebastian. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor. This was fantastic to kick us off. I have a number of questions. I'm sure other people have too, but right now we'll, to quote, I believe it was Monty Python, now for something completely different, not quite completely different, the U.S. Coast Guard. And James, you've got the floor.
Well, that's an auspicious start being compared to Monty Python. So I'm going to try to open up my screen here and just give me a moment because I'm technologically not too savvy. So hopefully you should see it now. Okay, great. Well, thrilled to be here. Jim Howe served 27 years on active duty in the Coast Guard. Liked it so much I wrote a book about it. But just wanted to give you kind of a 1,000-foot overview of what the Coast Guard does and maybe dispel some myths about what the Coast Guard is and what it isn't. The first myth is that the Coast Guard is not a military service. By law, it is. We have Title 10 authority. We have been a military service since 1915. We are one of the 6 armed forces. We've actually got one smaller than us right now. That's the Space Force, but they'll soon be much larger. But we are integrated into the national defense architecture pretty regularly, even though we don't work for the Department of Defense. We work for the Department of Homeland Security. We can be transferred to the U.S. Navy by presidential declaration in a time of war. That's happened twice, back in the First and Second World Wars. It has not happened since. It was considered for 9/11, but it did not happen then. And we actually, at that point, got transferred over to the new Department of Homeland Security, where we've been ever since. We've got law enforcement authority, which is unique amongst the American military services. And I think the most endearing characteristic of the Coast Guard is that we have a very broad range of responsibilities mandated by Congress. Everything from regulatory requirements all the way up through warfighting and everything in between. We're probably best known for 2 things, search and rescue, and for our maritime law enforcement efforts. So just on the operational side, I don't want to delve into the regulatory side and more of the shore side stuff. Just talk about our operational forces in this presentation, because that's the real sexy stuff anyway. The military, we've got about 40,000+ active duty people out there in uniform every day, about an equal number of reserve, civilian, and auxiliary folks supporting their efforts. And we've got a pretty substantial fleet. I think we're numerically about the 12th biggest Navy in the world. That's a little bit of a misnomer because we're not a Navy per se, we're a Coast Guard. You can see we've got some deployable units that can go on short notice just about anywhere in the world for various specialty functions. We've got about 200 fixed and rotary wing aircraft, a whole bunch of boats you can see ranging up to 65 feet in length. And then kind of the centerpiece of the Coast Guard is our cutter fleet, ranging from 65 to 418-foot ships, with some really amazing old ships and some really amazing new ships in the inventory. So we do worldwide operations. I don't want to be misleading here, though. When we go across the world for various things, it's usually episodic, and it's usually in fairly small numbers just because we are very stretched thin as a service. But we are not just a Coast Guard. In fact, we're probably the most poorly named of all the U.S. military services, because a Coast Guard you would think is someone that just kind of hangs out, you know, in the littoral area and maybe does some port security and things like that. And we are literally operating as we speak today, thousands of miles away from the U.S. coast on counter-drug operations and military operations throughout the hemisphere and the world. So the Coast Guard is really not the best name for us, quite frankly. And we're just about everywhere, again, in small numbers, but in support of our allies and the U.S. Navy. We also do a lot of training, as you can see here, with nations around the world. This is just the average year slide. It basically translates to we're really busy. And you can see about 4,500 lives on an average year, or how many people are walking the earth because the Coast Guard came along and saved them. You've also got the migrant interdiction mission, which we'll talk about more in a second. And then, of course, drug interdiction is a really big thing. And all that kind of ties into this counterterrorism. If you're looking for bad people trying to infiltrate the nation by sea, all these sorts of maritime law enforcement missions really bolster your capabilities there. So we're very, very busy. Talk about the budget and resources. Coast Guard's always been on a really thin budget. You know, our active duty workforce is a little bit bigger than the New York City Police Department by 1,000 or 2,000 people. So we have to cover the entire U.S. plus all the expeditionary operations and all the far offshore operations that we do every day. So that's not a whole lot of people, 41,000 active duty, to cover such a huge area of responsibilities. We've always had budget challenges. There were times when I was first joining back in the 1980s that were literally you had to bring your own toilet paper to work. I guess that kind of happens now in COVID too, but that's just kind of how thin the budget was. The move to Homeland Security has actually been very helpful because we're now surrounded by other operational agencies. Prior to this, we were a Department of Transportation, which really is not as much an operational agency as a regulatory agency. And we're going through a pretty major modernization effort I'll talk about in a second. We do depend on the Navy for common weapon systems. Our bigger cutters, larger cutters have Navy standard weapons so that there's no need for us to have our own specific support pipelines for that sort of thing. And we train and are evaluated and get a lot of supply and support from the U.S. Navy. Just to point out that we talked about the military sea lift ships and all those that are so old. My first ship was a Coast Guard cutter Active. You can see up in 1981, we made a drug bust, and that's the Active in the background. When I joined the ship in 1981, it was 15 years old. It's now still in active service. It's up in the Pacific Northwest right now. It's going to celebrate its 56th birthday of Coast Guard service this summer. And it'll probably be around for a couple more years, and it's working just great. So the Coast Guard really gets a lot of bang for its buck when it comes to maintaining its ships. But we are doing a really major recapitalization right now. The upper left is our new national security cutter. It's a 418-foot frigate-type ship. It's an absolutely amazing ship. It's fast. It's got great seakeeping. It's got a lot of weight space opportunities for other weapon systems. It does come with the Mark 110 57 millimeter Bofors deck gun. It's got the Sea-Wiz on it. It can house 2 of our smaller helicopters. Just a really amazing platform. We're going to have 11 of those when that buy is complete. And basically everything that we're replacing in the fleet, from our medium size boats to our patrol boats to our helicopters and fixed wing aircraft, everything we're replacing is with a better, more robust asset. It, just as an example, the fast response cutter you see there, that's 154 feet. It's got pretty good seakeeping capabilities. Well, that's replacing a ship that's only 110 feet. So it's just got a lot more that it can do for the public out there serving at sea. Just a quick point about, this whole idea of protecting the nation's maritime boundaries and, keeping bad people and bad things out of the country. If you look at our borders, you've got about 6,000 linear miles of land border, and it's basically a challenge of keeping people and things from stepping across that border. But you've got literally millions of square miles of maritime border. And really, where does your maritime border end? I don't know, but there are Coast Guard assets right now about 2,000 miles south of the US in the Eastern Pacific Ocean seeking out drug smuggling vessels. So is that part of our border security? Yep, sure is, because those drug smuggling vessels are going to bring large amounts of cocaine and other narcotics into the US, and we don't want that to happen. So we have to push the borders out as much as we can. You know, here's your land border interdiction challenge, is if someone jumps the fence, you arrest them. And here's our challenge in the maritime realm. You know, where is that line? There is no line. You have to kind of be really creative and use your small amount of assets very constructively out in such an environment. So just talking about two of the major law enforcement and kind of border security type of missions, we've got, of course, our drug interdiction has been going on since 1973. It occupies quite a bit of the Coast Guard's operational effort, about 1/4 of it in any given year, but it's a very collaborative effort with the Navy, with Customs and Border Protection, all the other federal agencies, and especially our international partners throughout the hemisphere, Canada, all the South American countries, Central American countries, Caribbean countries. I have personally sailed on counter-drug patrols alongside British warships, French warships, Dutch warships. I think there was once a Spanish warship down there that would make their excursions to the Caribbean. Even had my hat stolen once by the crew of a British warship during a port call, but that's a different story. It's a really big challenge in that you've got this huge maritime region to cover. The Eastern Pacific, where we're patrolling on the counter-drug mission, is larger in square miles than the entire continental US. And we'll be out there on any given day with maybe 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 different ships from the Navy and Coast Guard. Huge amount of territory to cover with a small amount of assets, making intelligence as to where the bad guys are really, really crucial. And you can see that it's about 30 million pounds of cocaine and marijuana have been seized during the drug war over the last almost 50 years. You know, here's some bulk marijuana. That's what it looks like. You don't see this too often. Usually it's hidden away somewhere in the vessel. Here you've got 3 examples of large amounts of cocaine in various forms and packages. Marijuana was the drug of choice being smuggled in the 70s and 80s, and now it's cocaine. The marijuana trade has gone way down. The cocaine trade has gone way up. Sometimes the bad guys, to be smart, will hide it in a hidden compartment here, actually under the hull on the outside of the vessel. We had to take this vessel out of the water to access the drugs. Sometimes it's on the inside. In the lower left, you see a compartment where you had to pry up the floorboard and crawl into the fuel tank to get to the access to the 1 ton of marijuana that was hidden in there. And of course, the bad guys, the smugglers, have gone to a lot of high-speed vessels because Coast Guard cutters aren't traditionally known for their high speed. The cutter you see here can do about 18 knots, and this boat can do about 30 knots. So then you have to find ways to stop them. And it's not just for short jaunts. I mean, the boat on the right here with the 5 engines, it was designed to go about 400 miles of open ocean through the Caribbean, from Colombia all the way up into the Bahamas, at very high speeds, about 40 to 50 knots. And there's no Coast Guard cutter or boat that could really catch it. So we had to be creative, and we came up with a new plan about 20 years ago. It's called airborne use of force. The gentleman you see in the lower left is in a helicopter, and he's got 2 weapons. He's got a small machine gun, and he's got a sniper rifle. And so if we come across a non-compliant speedboat that refuses to stop, we will first warn it with warning shots from the machine gun. And then if they refuse to stop, we will shoot out their engines. And it works pretty much every time. We've got just about a 1,000 batting average on that. If we can find them, we can stop them, is our new motto. And you also have a lot of innovation by the smugglers. You will sometimes see them towing a unmanned drone of some sort filled with drugs, where they can kind of just release it if they think they're going to get interdicted, and then they can claim that they don't know what we're talking about. And then you've got these really unique self-propelled semi-submersibles that are designed and built in the jungles of Colombia, mostly on the West Coast. They will then travel sometimes 2,000 or 3,000 miles on a one-way trip up to Mexico with several tons of cocaine on board. Because they're low profile and they don't give much of a radar signal, they're very, very hard to find. And that's been quite an interdiction challenge for us, is to locate and to stop these vessels. So moving on to the people side of the business, you know, the first major migrant interdiction was in 1980, when about 125,000 people fled Castro's regime in Cuba. And we had to be out there to help them get safely across the Straits of Florida. It's been steady, much lower activity since then, aside from 3 separate mass migrations in the 1990s, as you see there. But it's a very, very perilous thing because people are desperately trying to get to the US, and they will take extreme risk. If you look at that boat in the lower right corner, you can see about 25 or 30 faces on there. There's actually 110 people on that boat, that sailboat. And you can see it's riding pretty low in the water. If they had hit a storm or some real bad weather, that boat probably would have gone down. And in the upper picture, there's 410 people on that small coastal freighter, a 65-foot coastal freighter. So these are very perilous voyages. We've saved really over the last 40 years, almost 400,000 people from these sorts of really desperate situations. And more importantly, perhaps, is the amount of voyages that we've deterred by being out there in very visible presence off Haiti, off Cuba, off the Dominican Republic and other places to intercept these people, but more importantly, to kind of preclude them from leaving in the first place because they know they're going to get picked up and sent back home. This is a picture from the Mariel boat lift. You can see, hundreds of people crammed onto a small coastal freighter. More typically, this is what you will find is people trying to struggle their way here by rowing across the Straits of Florida. It's about a 90-mile gap between South Florida and Cuba. It's a very dangerous place, lots of strong ocean currents with the Gulf Stream. You get some bad weather there year-round with winter storms, and of course, summer thunderstorms. You see sometimes things as truly sad as this. I mean, 3 little guys trying to go 90 miles in that little tiny raft. And you will also see on occasion some very innovative type of configurations. Yep, take a look at that boat. And they were trying to get to Florida in an old pickup truck. It's pretty amazing. They had put a propeller on the drive shaft. So got to give them credit. Now, some of these things really turned tragic. Yeah, this was a boat with 212 Haitians on July 4th, 1994. The boat was found sinking off Haiti. One of our Coast Guard small boats was able to bring life jackets to it. A larger cutter showed up. And as they were just starting to take people off, the boat capsized. 2 people were lost, but 212 people would have been lost had the Coast Guard come along originally and found them, because that boat was literally headed to the bottom when we found it. A very sad situation, but thankfully we were able to save 210 of the 212 people. And then, of course, the question, and you see this probably a lot in Europe right now with the migrant flow across the Mediterranean and even between France and the UK, is what do you do with people once you find them? And it's taken a lot of years of kind of trial and error how you do these missions. You have to provide safety and health and food and water and sanitation to large amounts of people, many of whom might be sick or ill. At the same time, you have to keep your security, because sometimes, in fact, in many cases, the amount of migrants on board the Coast Guard cutter will greatly exceed the amount of Coast Guard people on board the same ship. So it really is a challenge to kind of handle these sorts of things. And these are people we're talking about. These aren't, bad people that you're going to put in handcuffs. These are good people who are trying to get a better life. But due to our laws, we're going to have to take them back to where they came from. So you have to treat them with respect, at the same time taking care of their human needs. And finally, just a little talk about some of our military operations. Here's a list of 8 of the, things that have happened either recently or in a more enduring status. We've had 6 of our patrol boats, in the Gulf of Arabia here since 2002 for the invasion of Iraq. They've been there ever since. They're never coming back. They're going to be there protecting the Iraqi oil infrastructure from Iranians and other influences. And of course, we do the drug interdiction, disaster response, and certain deployments going to Africa, even down all the way to Australia at times. And of course, the polar icebreaking mission, I can't go without talking about that. We're the only heavy icebreakers in the US fleet. And so that was a Navy mission until I think after World War II, it was transferred to the Coast Guard. It's actually in a very sad state of repair since we're down to 1 heavy icebreaker and 1 medium icebreaker, but there's help on the way with a few more being built, so that's good. You can see us here. We're in the Western Pacific during a multinational naval exercise. Here we are off of Indonesia, firing with the Indonesian Navy in a training exercise with one of our new national security cutters. Here we are in the Caribbean. That's a Canadian frigate right there you see. Here we are in southern Chile with 2 Chilean Coast Guard vessels off of Talcahuano, Chile. And get to shoot a lot of the guns, which is good. Like I said, they're standard naval weapon systems that we share with the US Navy and a lot of our allies, big guns and small guns. And circling back to Sal's discussion here, we take a lot of gas at sea to maintain our proficiency so we can steam with battle groups. But here you're actually looking at not a US, but a Canadian oiler. So we do it with all sorts of different nations and different capabilities there. So final thing I'll show you as far as the really good pictures is this is the icebreaker Polar Star off McMurdo Sound a few years back. I mean, this is the sort of thing that we do when I say we're around the world at times. You know, you can't get much farther away from the U.S. coast than Antarctica. In sum, just real quick, you know, we are a military service. We're very unique because of our wide range of responsibilities. It's really the law enforcement authority and expertise that's really been, you know, kind of, you know, top on our plate these last few years. And I would say that translates really well to military operations like maritime intercept operations. You know, if you have embargoes or blockades that have to be enforced, the Coast Guard has a lot of expertise in finding and stopping and boarding in permissive and non-permissive environments, you know, different vessels. That's something we can help the Navy with. We've really had this Homeland Security emphasis the last few years since 9/11, as you can imagine. And again, we're very stretched thin, but we try to be as you know, smart about how we apply our resources as possible. And really what we bring to the national military architecture are some niche capabilities in the port security, the you know, the polar ice breaking, you know, combat search and rescue, that sort of thing, where we can really help out things that the Navy has to do and might not have the expertise in their own ranks. And I do want to stress that we do collaborate very closely with both the U.S. DoD forces and our international naval partners. So with that, I will stop talking and be ready to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Captain. Another excellent presentation. And I can safely say that one of the objectives that I had, or we had, drawing up this series, namely to raise awareness on this side of the pond for, I dare say, American naval and maritime dynamics and problems. That is something that both of these presentations checked extremely well to me, namely that we in Europe need to be aware of some of the dynamics that that govern U.S. Coast Guard and U.S. Merchant Marine and Sea Lift fleets. And I'm inviting now both questions and comments on this matter, or any other questions you may have for any one of the presenters. If you could, please write in the chat function down on the bottom of your screen that you wish to ask a question, and we will call on you. And then once you have been called on, please just simply introduce yourself, just say your name or where you're from. And if your question is directed to one of the two speakers in particular, or both, that really helps us a lot. We have about 45 minutes, actually 45 minutes at the most, for your questions and comments. And we can kick it right off. We've got a question from Barry Walker. Barry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Burns. My name is Barry Walker. I'm with the Naval Association of Canada. I'm in Ottawa, Canada. My question is for Professor Mercogliano. When you talked about the need for sea lift and additional resources to provide the shuttle services and the longer range resupply, I take it you're assuming that the U.S. will be fighting alone. And could you comment, therefore, on the need for multinational capabilities in that area?
There is, I mean, obviously there's assumptions that the U.S. would have allies and be able to fight the conflict. The issue really becomes in the fact that most of shipping today, commercial shipping, is under international corporations. For example, nearly 85% of all container lines are really located in 9 central companies, which are in 3 massive mega alliances. And the question really becomes is, will national flags be able to exert pressure to get their merchant marines to support conflicts? Unfortunately, the U.S. has an experience in particularly the Vietnam War, where it fought a struggle with not many allies, but really none that had a merchant marine capability that could help it. And so literally it was really fell upon the U.S. Merchant Marine and the U.S. Sea Lift assets to perform that function. Now, the U.S. does have plans with NATO and Korea and a few other countries to provide necessary shipping. The problem is that international aspect of shipping has become where we see, will these international companies make their vessels available for them. We've seen the fact that international companies can keep ships laid up for an extremely long period of time. Just look at cruise lines right now. You know, and to defer them from losing ships or be able to lose marketplaces, that's a concern they have. And again, that's an element that the U.S. military has to weigh against. Are they comfortable with the concept of not having an inherent sea lift capability to support that element? That's a prediction they will have to make, and they can plan accordingly to that. What I wanted to do is really highlight where there's potential issues coming forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. At the moment, we don't have any more questions, so I will go ahead and ask my own question to both of our presenters. I was wondering if you do know about any international fora where, let's say, that the commander of Transcom or the commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard meet with their European counterparts to discuss some of the issues that occur in both for their service, but also as it relates to expeditionary operations, if I call it that. I'm just curious whether there's a sort of a structured dialogue or trialogue or whatever you want to call it between the services in the U.S. and the European partners, seeing that they're both not under the NATO umbrella per se.
Sal, you want to go first?
No, go ahead, Captain.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the Coast Guard's got a lot of interaction through a variety of means. You know, on the civilian side, we are, you know, very closely aligned with the IMO in London, and spend a lot of time, you know, working through IMO on a variety of issues. We do have people at UCOM. We do, you know, visit with NATO and the leadership there. And of course, we have good relations with all the numbered fleets across the world. So as far as specific forums, I'm not aware of any that come to mind, but I do know that we're kind of plugged in. And really for us, it's pretty straightforward. If the U.S. Navy and Department of Defense, a combatant commander, has a need for a Coast Guard specialty or a Coast Guard kind of backup to what the Navy and the other DoD forces are doing, they ask for it and we show up. And then you have, you know, always the tussle between the people, you know, for example, in Congress who want us to just be protecting the U.S. mainland, and then the people who are perfectly happy with our expeditionary rule. I recall back at the start of the invasion of Iraq, there was a big political, I would say almost a scream fest over, you know, should we be sending these patrol boats over there to help out with the war effort when they're needed here for drug interdiction and for counterterrorism patrols and that sort of thing. And they came up to the idea of sending 6 of those patrol boats full time over. So, so yeah, it's a very collaborative process, but we're here to support. I mean, our commandant is not a member of the Joint Chiefs. Some people argue he should be. Our ties to the Navy, I would say over the last 20 years have gotten much, much better. When I joined the service, we kind of were rivals with the Navy and didn't talk to them as much as we do now, probably by a factor of 10. But we are fully integrated. I mean, I'm TAO trained, tactical action officer at the Navy SWO school up in Newport. Even though the Coast Guard doesn't have missiles on its ship, I know how to fire a Harpoon missile, that sort of thing. It's kind of a skill I really can't put on my resume. But the point being is that you know, we have really close integration with the Navy as we need to if we're going to be part of you know, the DoD forces that are doing things around the world.
I would add that you know, United States Transportation Command is a global. It's not a regional based sync, and so it has global implications. General Lyons, who's the commander of it, has 3 component commanders: an Army, a Navy, and an Air Force component commands. And a lot of that interaction that goes on the local basis is done by those component commanders. It's done by the SDDC reps on the ground, AMC reps. And I use the example of Defender 2020, which was the recent reinforcement and rotation of forces into Eastern Europe. That was a very much an interaction between European units and European forces on the ground there. Ironically, it's the Army that tends to have more of this interaction than the Navy. Army tends to operate the ports. The Navy, under Military Sea Lift Command, takes care of the port to port, where the Army takes care of the fort to port kind of movement. And it is a bit of a schism between the two areas. Matter of fact, the Army handles the intermodal transportation, the container transportation, the movement of goods more than the Navy does, which creates an issue with the command structure of Military Sea Lift Command. But I think General Lyons, in particularly, does take these opportunities to go global to talk. He supported regionally in the United States by a commercial kind of organization, the National Defense Transportation Association. But he also does undertake, through his regional commands and these local commands, a lot of interaction and how the United States performs its sea lift, airlift, and component missions on the ground.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Colin Darlington, who does not have a microphone. So I will read the questions aloud. The first one is for Sal. What is the capacity of the US to support allies, for example, Canada, and I personally, Sebastian, adding European allies, who might need lift to deploy and sustain expeditionary forces in a multinational mission? Once again, what's the capacity of US to support allies who might need lift to deploy and sustain expeditionary forces in a multinational mission? And for James, the question, similarly framed, to what extent is there or should there be collaboration with other countries, such as Canada or maybe Europeans, about icebreaker design and build? Thank you.
The U.S. has supported allies with sea lift capability in the Balkans in the 1990s, for example. Lift capacity was made available. Several vessels from the Ready Reserve Force were broken out and used to haul European cargo down there. And that's one of the aspects that the United States does. It has made sea lift capacity available to them. It also led to decisions, for example, in Britain, for example, the Point class sea lift ships, the decision to create that program so that Britain would have a capability, a sea lift capability it could draw upon. Canada had a very negative experience with sea lift capability when they were bringing equipment back from Canada right around the year 2000, 2001. They had chartered a foreign ship, and that foreign ship refused to go into the port of Canada because the company basically was worried the ship would be arrested for funds, and the Canadian Navy actually had to go out and seize the vessel and bring it into port. A large chunk of the Canadian Armed Forces rolling stock was stuck on these vessels. So the U.S. has made its shipping available. And I think there is potential for the development of sea lift capability across international lines. I think, again, as you look at where shipping is, commercial shipping, it tends to be in these large kind of flags of conveniences because it's cheaper. It's just cheaper to operate. It's cheaper to pay the crews. But again, will that provide the sea lift necessary you need to go into an environment where there's potential hostility? Will the crew balk? Will the company balk? And then you have to go in and move the cargo. And that's been an issue for a long time. Will that happen? One of the reasons that the United States has really embarked on the program that's existed for the past 100 years or so was during World War I, the United States found itself reliant on foreign shipping for its international shipping. And then as a result of a war that we did not get into for 3 years, our international shipping plummeted. Imports, exports fell. It created a large problem for the United States. And that's why you saw the passage of really the first national sea lift strategy, which was the Merchant Marine Act of 1920.
So the question on icebreakers is a great question because the U.S. has gone through some, I would say, peaks and valleys when it comes to its icebreaker capability. You know, we inherited in the Coast Guard this mission from the Navy after World War II. There were about a half dozen larger icebreakers that could go to either of the polar regions and do their missions. But as those 1940 era's ships started to kind of fall apart and have to get decommissioned, we built two large heavy icebreakers, the Polar Star and the Polar Sea, in the 1970s. And later we built in the 1990s the Healy, which is more of a research vessel with a icebreaking hull that does mostly Arctic voyages. It's kind of a medium strength icebreaker. One of the two heavy icebreakers has now been put in inactive status just because all the main engines were inoperable and you couldn't get parts anymore. So we're down to one heavy icebreaker, but there is help on the way. We've got a new program that the Congress has crammed through to build, a couple. It's kind of ill-defined right now how many. It might be one, it might be two, it might be three of the heavy icebreakers. And typically what we do is when you start a procurement like that is you'll do a market survey and see what's out there. I don't know for a fact that we talked to the Canadians about design and capabilities, but I'm pretty sure that the folks in charge of the program did look at all the major icebreaking capabilities around the world and try to figure out what would be best for the Coast Guard's missions. So it'll be interesting to see how that program progresses. I mean, it's pretty expensive. It's about $800 million per icebreaking hull. That's not cheap for the U.S. Coast Guard with our annual budget of only about $10 billion. So in an acquisition world, it's going to be a very hard thing to get through to keep it on budget, on task. But I think you'll see probably within the next decade 2 or 3 new heavy icebreakers in the Coast Guard arsenal, and that will be good for another 30 or 40 years.
And if I could just add one thing to what Captain Howe said, I mean, if you look around the world where icebreakers are built, there's really 2 countries that build icebreakers. It's Russia and Finland. Those are really the 2. China's getting into it, but those are the 2 where you see it. Probably not going to get the help from the Russians for that, but the Finns are obviously the choice. The question really becomes within the United States, do we want our ships being built overseas for military and for national reasons? I think one of the things is we've seen across the commercial industry is specialization of shipyards. Shipyards really become specialized into certain constructions, certain types of ships. And the Finns most certainly have that expertise. And agreements whereby the Finns may build 1 or 2 and then start building them in the United States is a potential for down the road. Question is the U.S. Congress going to be willing to allow a ship to be built overseas when they could be built in the United States, but at an exorbitantly much more expensive cost?
Yeah, and the answer to that is probably no.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure, at least in the previous administration, it would have been no. I'd say also that one of the kind of enduring questions that always comes up when you talk icebreakers is, should it be nuclear powered? Because many of the Russian icebreakers are nuclear powered. And in fact, a little known fun fact is the Coast Guard Academy back in the 1970s actually had a nuclear engineering program, because at that point it looked like they were going to be building some nuclear powered icebreakers at some point in the future. So that program didn't last too long because we never built them. Everything we did is diesel powered. We're not the Navy, we're the Coast Guard. But that's always been a consideration. I think what they're looking at now is another diesel powered ship. I don't see really anything on the horizon for the nuclear, but that's kind of an interesting concept to think about.
Thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to learn that there's an honest debate about, or an honest and informed discussion about icebreakers in the US. Sometimes in Germany, I'm under the impression whenever people talk about climate change as it pertains to the high north, everyone sort of assumes that ice caps will be receding eventually anyway. So you really don't need icebreaking capability to operate up there in the first place. And so thank goodness for our Finnish friends. The next question is from Andrew Gustafsson.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Okay, great. So I work at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which now has a commercial ship repair yard. And my question is, could you talk a little bit about what the federal government is doing to support shipyards, both for construction, but also for repair, which is what we do at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and kind of what more could be done to expand shipyard capacity, as well as diversify shipyard capacity in the U.S. to support these missions?
I think that's a huge issue that the United States is facing right now. The amount of yard capacity out there has diminished greatly. There's very few shipyards that are building ships. There's fewer shipyards that can do repairs. It's not, most shipyards on the West Coast, for example, of the United States are jammed. There's no room for them to get any more ships in. Military Sealift Command, for example, is sending ships through the Panama Canal to go to East Coast and Gulf Coast yards because of the availabilities that are out there. And again, it goes to the idea, not to get extremely wonky here, but if you go back to the traditional definition of sea power by Mahan is a Navy captain. He talks about the military application of sea power, but he also says in the introduction, which again, no one ever reads Mahan, they always quote Mahan. But when you read it, what he talks about is the fact is that a true sea power has a commercial and a military component to it. And in many ways, we've divested ourselves of that commercial aspect, for a variety of different reasons. Our Jones Act fleet diminished because we built the interstate highway system, the interstate pipeline system. In the 1980s, when the 600-ship Navy was being talked about, we cut subsidies and differentials for construction and operation for the international fleet. And the 600-ship Navy flocked into private yards in the United States as we shut down as we shut down Navy yards for construction, and then that collapsed. And so, the issue that we have is again, a very diminished repair capability. I go back to the 2017 collisions of McCain and Fitzgerald. It took a year and a half to fix Fitzgerald. And again, in a scenario where we need repair capability, it's not there. Again, I think it really has to be a coherent maritime structure. The U.S. Navy and pardon me, Captain Howe, but the Coast Guard and the Marine Corps love to do these tri-service publications on maritime strategy, but they always leave out the commercial element. And I think that's an issue. I know building a container ship is not the same thing as building a national security cutter or building a submarine. But in many ways, the repair capability, building the hulls, a lot of the mechanics of building a ship are generic in some ways. And every time you have to ramp up a production facility to build a ship, 1 or 2 ships, as I mentioned to you before, that takes time and it becomes much more expensive because your welders, your engineers, and all your people have left. And I think right now the repair capability is a big one. It was very strong that the Biden administration came out in support of a Jones Act and supporting that. But I am not a diehard Jones, as many people think I am. I'm not. It needs reform. There needs to be implementation of reform. I oppose direct repeal, which would open the United States coastal trade to foreign flags, because again, I don't think most Americans care who hauls their T-shirts and their socks to Walmart. They don't care. It doesn't matter. But on a national security element, I think it does care. Because in times of war and conflict, you need that strain in there. So for on the repair capability, as you're seeing in Brooklyn, I think one of the things we have to do is really do what we can to help and incentivize that, tax cuts, elements that can be done without throwing money at them. I'm not really a big fan of subsidies because I think that's an abuse. But I think there's some innovative ways to really make it more affordable to get work done in the United States and to really kind of push a U.S. maritime strategy. Sorry, kind of a long answer.
Yeah, it's a really good answer. I really can't add much more to that on the substance. And thanks for the question. I would say that, the Coast Guard actually operates its own shipyard in Curtis Bay, Maryland, to do, I would say, kind of the mid-level to minor repairs, basically the, annual or biannual, yard periods, just to make sure you put on the new propellers and clean the bottom of the hull, that sort of thing. We actually built a small class of cutters there back in the 1960s. We don't really do that anymore at Curtis Bay. It's more just a repair facility. But we send most of our Coast Guard ships to private shipyards, for their, biannual, haul out of the water, that sort of thing. And, having been on a certain class of ship that back in the 80s that used to break down all the time, we spent a lot of time in shipyards, and none of them were the Curtis Bay shipyard. So that's a really important point you make, is having that infrastructure. It kind of leads to a broader discussion, though, that I'm sure in various other seminars you're going to have, Dr. Bruns, is this whole thing about, supply chains and infrastructure to support, a military capability. Look at things like critical metals and minerals that are needed for certain circuit boards that the DoD uses in our nuclear weapons and things like that, where the only place in the world to get it right now is China. I mean, that's absolutely insane to think that we're going to rely on China for anything, much less critical components. So that's why you've seen over recent years a push to develop these sorts of mining capabilities, and it's all about the fact it costs 10 times more here in the States to do it than with the underpaid labor over in China. Because these critical metals and minerals do exist here in the States, but there's 1,000 different things in the supply chain for the U.S. military where we probably let down our guard, shipyards among them, that we really need to kind of rethink if we're going to have this military capability that can sustain itself in a large conflict.
Thank you very much, and you've given us some homework there. All of these issues very much resonate with me and with European decision makers as well. I'm afraid no one really has the conversation about rare earth materials and where they come from on this side of the pond either. John Grady is the next individual on my list.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, first question goes to Captain Howe. And what advanced training is the Coast Guard providing for its existing force to move into the new vessels? I'm talking about national security cutters here first. And then more importantly, what are they doing for the heavy icebreakers? And the second question is to Sal. What about buying more foreign ships and converting them to bridge the gaps in sustainment shipping? Right now, there seems to be an indication, or there was in the Trump administration, to go ahead and do that. But whether the Biden administration would go along and say, we're going to buy these ships, we're going to convert, we'll pay the cost of conversion, and we'll go from there. So first to Captain Howe and then to Sal.
Yeah, thanks for the great question. So, for example, a national security cutter, the training that goes into every crew member, you know, depending on their rate or their specialty, or if you're an officer, if you're going to be the operations officer or have anything to do with weapon systems, you will be put in a training pipeline, you know, before you even show up to the ship. So if, for example, you're a machinery technician and you're going to be dealing with the engines, you've got to go through certain specific training that's kind of pre-programmed, where you'll learn about the specific power plant and how to repair it and how to maintain it. On the combat systems side, like I said, I mean, when I was going off to a 270-foot cutter that had the Mark 75 76 millimeter, I spent 10 glorious weeks up in Newport learning how to be a tactical action officer, just like the Navy guys. In fact, I was one of 2 coasties in a class of 50 people, all the rest being U.S. Navy. So we were trained right with them, so that if a Navy guy, you know, get hit by a pie truck and the Navy called up and said, send me a tactical action officer, they should be able to pluck one of these trained coasties, send them to the Navy to help out. So that's the sort of thing we do, is we've got a training pipeline. It's well established. It really makes it really good for the guys showing up, because they usually know their way around the ship. Now, sometimes you show up, you haven't had all the training, you'll have to go off to school, you know, during the first deployment or whatever to kind of catch up. But typically you'll be on board, if you're enlisted, for 3 years on one of our major cutters. Officers are sometimes 2 or 3 years. So you've got plenty of time to kind of apply those skills.
On the purchase of the foreign vessels, if you look at the Sealift recapitalization plan that was promulgated in the Navy's 30-year plan they just recently did, basically for the surge Sealift side, and I'll get to sustainment in a second, for the surge Sealift side, they have kind of a 3-prong approach. They're going to buy foreign ships and reflag them in. Admiral Gilday talked about the fact that he can get foreign flag ships for $30 million versus building new ships for $300 million. And that can provide a quick fix to the aging fleet. We can build new surge Sealift ships, which we can build and put into the reserve fleet automatically, and then we can update existing ships, kind of do a SLEP, a sea life extension program to them. And this is very similar to what we did post Persian Gulf War. Same exact approach. It's the same exact approach. We're just going to do that again for that. I would argue a couple of things that are different today in 2021 than they were in 1990. Ships are built to different standards today than before. I have a good friend who's a chief mate on a car carrier, U.S. flag car carrier, but built in Korea. And that chief mate talks about the fact that before they load Kias on board, they have to go on the top deck where the berthing is, open all the doors to prevent the deck from buckling, and they can't shut the doors or open the doors. And if you have a problem loading Kias on a car carrier, you know, you put M1A1 Abrams on there, that's going to be an issue. So that tends to be a problem with just buying foreign vessels to fix a problem. I think on the sustainment side, on the merchant fleet side, again, there's 3 things that keep the U.S. merchant flag going right now. There's 3 elements, 3 legs of this stool. There's government contracts where the ships are chartered directly to the U.S. military and cargo preference, where they're hauling specific cargo for the U.S. government. There is the Jones Act, which is the coastal trade, where ships have to be built, flagged, owned, and crewed in the United States. And then there's the Maritime Security Program. That Maritime Security Program uses largely foreign-built ships, U.S. flagged in international trade, but they still require $5 million a year to get the costs down to a certain level so they can operate. The other big issue, and this is the issue always commercial will tell you, is we need cargo. We're not going to bring ships into the United States unless we have cargo to haul. And there has to be a way to incentivize hauling on American ships if you want an American merchant marine. It's very hard right now to compete against these big international carriers. It's very hard. You know, outfits like Maersk and CMA and other firms are willing to take losses to run firms out of business and then take the trade over. And it's very, very much free spirit, free trade capitalism on the high seas. We see that being done. We see that with the escalation of freight rates to the United States and to Europe right now by the carriers. So obviously you can bring foreign flag ships in. The question is the cargo available to them? And what are you doing to offset the cost for the higher wage crews? Average salary on board a Chinese flag ship is $24,000 a year. There was a story in Splash 24/7 recently that within the British Merchant Marine that junior officers were leaving because you can make more money as a barista than you can sailing on a ship. And if you can, work at Starbucks and be home every night and have your weekends off, that's much more appealing than being out in the high seas. We got to do something to offset that incentive. Again, I argue that if you're a merchant mariner sailing an international trade, your federal taxes, for example, should be waived. That money doesn't go to the mariner, it doesn't go to the unions, but it goes, it's reduced. And so it becomes cheaper for ships to operate. You have to become more willing to do. The problem within the US industry, which is very similar to other industries, is it's very siloed. Mariners, unions, shipyards, carriers, operators, they all operate separately, and they see any threat to one of them as a threat to the other one. And so they're willing to literally stab themselves to prevent, the other guy from moving ahead. And that philosophy has to change, or else you're going to see the further decline of the maritime industry in the United States, which has implications for both the Navy and the Coast Guard, I would argue, as that maritime industrial base declines.
Thank you very much. The next question, or one more question from Colin Darlington. I'm going to read it out again. To what extent are there plans to take up vessels from trade to modify to naval Coast Guard purposes and employing contingencies when sea lift or U.S. Coast Guard fleets are lacking? That is, vessels of opportunity, thinking Arapaho, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right, and of course Atlantic Conveyor, the makeshift Harrier carrier that was sunk 39 years ago off the Falklands. The question is for either or both. Whoever feels free to answer.
Yeah, Sal, if I can jump in real quick, the Coast Guard has no such plans, but we actually tried that a couple of times. During the heyday of the drug war, we got some civilian vessels and we used them for mobile aerostats, which is the big balloon that you kind of float up in the air with a radar attached to it. And that actually worked pretty well. It was a lease type of situation. But I was actually on a fleet of cutters. It was only 3 ships. They were commercial oil rig crew boats that had been bought by the Coast Guard on very short notice. The Congress had given us 2 weeks to buy $14 million worth of ships, which the Coast Guard did. They bought these ships and they were built to civilian standards. And literally we spent the next about 5 years beating our heads against the wall, trying to keep them operating because they kept breaking every time we go out to sea. Now, they were great ships. They were fast. They were seaworthy, but they just had a lot of structural issues. The Coast Guard, we are not known for being easy on our assets. We take our ships and we beat the crap out of them because we want to be at sea. And a lot of times when trouble happens, it's in bad weather. You just can't go home and say, oh, the waves are too big. So our experience was not real good. And what we did is we replaced those ships with well-designed patrol boats, the Island class, the 110-footers. Many of them are still in service today. Those are the 6 ships also that are over in the Gulf right now off of Iraq. These are ships that were designed with a 15-year design lifespan because it uses thin British mild steel in the hull. And many of these ships now are well past 30 years of life experience and doing just fine. So again, we keep our ships running for a long time because we maintain them right. And more importantly is we make sure that they're designed properly at the start so that we don't have to go through the experience like we did with those 3 off-the-shelf ships.
I think the British had a very positive experience with stuff, taking ships up from trade and using them during the Falklands War. Obviously, the ships provided an essential service, 7,000 miles from Great Britain down to the Falklands. I always love to take that map of the Atlantic, flip it on its side, and tell Americans this is what you're going to have to do in a Pacific struggle. Same thing, you're going to have these issues with Ascension and being Pearl Harbor and Midway and Guam along the way. The question that's not usually asked is what happens when the ships came back? and those ships had been replaced by other flagships that had come in, and they'd really lost their trade. And you see a precipitous decline of the British Merchant Marine in the early 1980s as a result of that. One of the reasons for the surge sea lift fleet, those 61 ships I mentioned to you before, is to prevent really a disruption in the American trade in some ways. It was designed so that, in case of a limited conflict, Persian Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan, you don't have to disrupt coastal trade to go ahead and do that. Now, in a peer-to-peer conflict, you're going to have to. We saw that in World War I. We saw that in World War II. You would see that in a peer-to-peer conflict today. You would have to tap in to not just the Maritime Security Program, those 60 ships that are given an incentive to stay in the U.S. trade, but you have to tap into the 100 ships in the Jones Act. The problem you have, again, is those fleets are declining in numbers, and there's less and less capability of them to be around. One of the 4 Polar class tankers, one of those ships I showed you that we used that design to convert into, for example, the Expeditionary Support Base, one of them is laid up right now. There's a potential for that ship to be scrapped. U.S. Navy can purchase that vessel quickly, stick it out in an island in the middle of the Pacific, and it can refuel 10 Kaiser class oilers. It can be a mobile fuel point with a capability to do that. It has that capability to do that. The U.S. Navy talks about using oil rig supply vessels, these offshore vessels, to convert them into drones, into unmanned vessels, or to small man crewed vessels, and put VLS launchers on them. Navy's talking about that for a long time, but every day down in Fushan and ports along the Gulf Coast, those ships are being loaded on the back of heavy lift carriers and taken away and scrapped. And one of the big issues is, again, I think that the Navy, number one, moves too slow to react to this. You can get vessels right now and be used it. There's a big debate about autonomous vessels in Navy service versus commercial. I find it very hard to believe there's going to be autonomous vessels doing transoceanic passage. I don't think you're going to find anybody to insure a vessel that has no crew on board. I think you're going to see further and further automations and lower crew numbers. That's probably the case. But again, to go with Captain Howe just mentioned, the Coast Guard was able to get a few vessels, convert them, demonstrate the positive and the negative about them, and then replace them with vessels that were more suited to them. I think that's something that you can tap into the commercial merchant marine to do very quickly. Instead of putting all your new technology on a new ship, put them on some of these other vessels and then demonstrate how well they work.
Thank you very much. Quite fascinating. And of course, my pet peeve is the Falklands War, and something that I think we still need to study more in depth when it comes to being creative about getting platforms to the front line. But anyway, that's just my commentary. The next commentary is from the gentleman who's operating Todd's iPhone.
Yes, how you doing? My name's Todd Hiller, Fort Schuyler, class of '93. So Sal would, he's probably smiling about that. I'm also a Navy reservist. I'm stationed over here in Bahrain, and I can attribute to Captain Howe's statement on his Coast Guard fleet. They're doing very well. They're playing well with the Navy. The Navy's playing well with them, and they're doing a fine job. When I'm not on reserve Navy duty here, I'm also an employee with the Maritime Administration. And to follow up with a comment made about incentives for shipyards, I work in the branch for marine engineering and shipbuilding, and as a naval architect and through the Maritime Administration, they've offered small shipyard grants to these yards, and it's a stipend of money. The shipyard will put together a grant package, submit it to the Maritime Administration, and ask for a certain amount of funding. Now, the way the program works is that the yard has some capital to contribute to the cost of buying equipment to make their yards more competitive and more efficient so that they can attract more business and continue to stay in service. In the past, we've seen grant packages from 70, 80 to over 100 shipyards and in the US, small shipyards, and typically will offer monies from the government for probably upwards around 20 shipyards, 20 to 30 shipyards. So there is there's a stipend there from the government to assist with the U.S. shipbuilding capabilities. As a strategic sea lift officer on Navy duty right now, I can attribute to the fact that I have a strong staff of strategic sea lift officers that are working in my NCAG shop here in Bahrain. And they're all actively sailing on their licenses. And some of the big woes and concerns that they have is when, if they're going to have another ship to go on and sail and continue to sail. So that is as Sal was stressing earlier with, the decline of U.S. Ships in our fleet. It's also a concern with our mariners and keeping them gainfully employed. I think both presenters have done a fine job representing both the Coast Guard and also the strategic sea lift piece of what's being discussed today with the group. And I applaud them both for their time and their efforts that they've contributed to this seminar. And I thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Those are almost parting words. We have one more individual who will ask a question. Rafael Uribe Neira, you've got the floor.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Rafael, and I have a question about the role of the Coast Guard, the role of the, not the role, but this topic about the Coast Guard Navy cooperation. And specifically, if I follow the discussion right, many of the current discussion evolves around how the Coast Guard can do more for the Navy in different theaters in South China and in others. My question is actually about which are the challenges of the Navy Coast Guard cooperation in the Caribbean when Navy has to support the Coast Guard, and yeah, what kind of challenges are there in this region? Because it's something I don't quite understand very well, and it's not very good documented. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say the number one challenge with US and Coast Guard and Navy cooperation is resource allocation. Is we don't have enough ships to really support the Navy in all they probably want for us to do in the Western Pacific, off of North Korea, into the Straits of Taiwan and other places over there. And in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific for the drug war, the Navy no longer has enough ships to really give the drug warriors what they need to really do the mission. I mean, if you look at the size of the Navy fleet, which has gone down, by 50% over the last 3 decades, roughly, you just don't have this huge amount of resource capability to just kind of throw at these issues. So in the Caribbean, for example, you might have had at one point, a half dozen large Navy gray hulls, maybe back in the 1980s. You probably have, 1 or 2 now, if any. You do get support from the fixed wing aircraft, of course, the P3s, now the P8s, and other Navy assets that are out there that we get support from. But it's really just a numbers question at this point. The U.S. fleet, the naval fleet has shrunk markedly, over my life in the naval services. But it's coming back. It's just going to take a long, long time to get there. The Coast Guard is kind of stayed about the same size. Our difference is that, our older ships like that one I showed you, the 56-year-old active, that is not a particularly fast ship. It can only hold 1 helicopter, and it doesn't have the best seakeeping capabilities for, staying out there forever. These newer ships are just dramatically better. I mean, these national security cutters are, one of the best frigate-sized ships in the world. You compare it to any naval frigate in the world, it'll come across quite well. So that's what it's all about, is the resources.
Thank you very much. That again is both very poignant as parting words, but also homework for all of us on this call, and with each of our individual and institutional backgrounds, resources, to look at the resources and to raise enough of them. And if we can't raise resources, then at least raise some hell about how crucial these resources are in facilitating America's navies, and to look at maritime players and maritime institutions that are not necessarily those that exclusively operate gray hulls with white numbers painted on their bow. With that said, I want to thank Sal and James warmly for 2 excellent presentations. I'm sure we could be going on for quite some time, but this has been a fascinating kickoff. I'm very pleased with how it went. I want to thank all of you on this call for making time, for being here, for participating, for asking questions. I want to thank my research aide, Henrik Schilling, for getting the technical stuff done. Appreciate that. And I hope to see many of you in 2 weeks. We'll have the next session on Thursday, February 10th. One of the speakers will be talking about the Mexican Navy. And we hope we are still in the process of getting an individual from the naval industry who can talk about the Americas as a naval market. So stay tuned. You can register via the website, put it in the chat. And until then, remain sane, remain healthy, both physically as well as mentally in these testing times. And hope to see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.